Very good. So we shall begin. So good morning to you all. I'm Jason Roberts, Managing Director and Founder of Human Capital Consultancy. Thank you very much for dialing into this webinar today. So we as an organization specialize in capturing qualitative data from employees. And we do that through a number of means of conducting one-on-one anonymous interviews, as well as all kind of operations that involve speaking to employees in an anonymous basis that allows them to share how they truly feel. And we then in turn as a partner to HR and L&D departments take that anonymous data and feed it back to the employer to allow them to actually begin to action the true causes for disengagement. Over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to really just discuss a bit about what employees really want to get off their chest, what they really have to say behind closed doors, so to speak. But more importantly, what happens to an employee when they do not share the information that is kind of sitting on their chest or bothering their conscience. We'll talk about how this affects employee performance, and also what happens in the brain as a result of maybe holding back information that you may want to share. I'm also pleased to have a special guest on this particular webinar in Zoe Aston, our psychotherapist. And Zoe will be able to take any questions that you might have. So using the tools, please, there's some technicalities here. Can you just use the show hands button, please, and make sure you can hear me, okay? Okay, lots of raised hands, very good. Am I looking camera ready? I'm not too sure, but very good, lots of showed hands. So as I mentioned, Zoe is our psychotherapist, is a qualified psychotherapist, and I've asked her here today to address some of the questions that you might have. Using the Q&A tool, if you post your questions there, it'd be very helpful for us to capture the questions and address them either now in person or at the end of the session, we can kind of send a little write-up to you as well. There's also a short poll that I'll ask you to complete as well. Just a couple of questions to help us understand how we do and if the topics are useful to you. So please do feel free to fill out those polls as well. So I think the poll should be active. I'll launch the polls now, so you should actually have access to that. So yeah, very good. So as I mentioned, as an organization, what we do is we work with organizations and companies to capture real qualitative data. And we specialize in doing this from an anonymous basis because ultimately, we have understood from our clients and employees themselves that there's often a reservation around speaking to HR, to managers, to really share how employees really feel. So speaking to a third party allows the individual to share what's really bothering them, what's really causing disengagement. And we take that information, like I said, and actually share it back in an anonymous fashion to HR and L&D teams to help them perform projects or implement projects that will drive engagement. So some of the things that we've heard, as you may have seen, particularly on LinkedIn or on our YouTube channel, employees have a lot to say, but there are several reasons why they keep information back and do not share it with their employer. And these things ultimately cause and can be a cause of depression and anxiety within employment. Recently, we conducted a number of real, live, filmed, anonymous intelligence interviews with a number of volunteers. And what was interesting was in those environments where employees can actually share how they really feel, we captured some really interesting observations around things that were causing disengagement and how people really felt. And these are typically subjects and themes that surveys don't necessarily capture or are not designed to capture. And where we've been very successful is actually capturing the qualitative data to lay on top of an organization's quantitative data that they might capture through their employee satisfaction surveys. So any one of these particular themes that come up on this screen here now that are particularly stand out to you or ring a bell, please type it into the box so we can kind of capture what really stands out to you. One of the ones that really kind of stood out to me though during the conversations with these individuals was the constant theme of not being listened to. And it really kind of bodes well to this particular webinar today. So there are a number of personal repercussions that individuals feel as a result of not being heard and not being listened to. And that can lead to depression and anxiety or low self-esteem, and ultimately can result in substance abuse as well. Now, Zoe as a qualified psychotherapist, really focuses on the human behavior and addiction and trauma. And we'll be able to talk about some of the questions, well, maybe able to answer some of the questions that you might have around how anxiety and depression in the office place can manifest itself and ultimately impact the employees from achieving peak performance. So here's a good example of a short video of a highlight, of the live interviews. Surveys for scale, interviews for detail. Hi, I'm Jason Roberts, and you're watching a Human Capital Consultancy live employee engagement interview. In this environment here, you can say exactly how you feel.
It's just becoming increasingly frustrating, which has led me to the ultimate decision to want to leave.
Right. Well, what would be some of the things that an employee in this situation would want to tell the MD, but then chooses not to?
You know, sometimes I don't really feel like going in to deliver what I'm supposed to because I don't feel like there'll be an impact.
Come to terms with it, I actually feel more motivated to actually searching for new jobs.
Wow. Were there things that you wanted to talk about that you hadn't had the opportunity to speak about because the questionnaires were quite specific?
On a scale of 1 to 10, are you happy in your job? So what do you say then? A medium answer, and that's it. And that was the end of the question. So I felt that the questionnaire was absolutely pointless. In fact, I think after a while I stopped filling out the questionnaires.
Very much a blame culture, and very much a fear culture as well. You know, people are afraid.
Thank you. Now I'll end the video there. But any comments or observations about the video, please type in the comments below. We want to kind of understand what you feel about these videos. But as we kind of move forward in the presentation, what's interesting is when we look at the brain, being unable to really voice your opinions can cause a detrimental effect to one's neurological health. And that results in a loss of confidence, a rise in anxiety, and can also result in social withdrawal as well. So there are often situations in an organization where an employee may be in a meeting room and actually holds back from saying what they want to say for a number of reasons. There's going to be the concern around repercussions or reprisal, around being labeled, and all those actually result in a reduced level of serotonin in the brain. Now, serotonin as a chemical or a hormone is there to actually improve the mood, and it can prevent depression. Now, problems such as depression and anxiety often lead to sleep disorders, and what research has shown is that individuals with low serotonin levels also tend to spend a lot of less time in a non-REM sleep pattern. So when you kind of connect the dots to individuals who have an opinion in the office, but are unable to share that opinion, or feel they cannot share that opinion because of repercussions, it becomes a very vicious cycle of anxiety, depression, and ultimately can lead to self-medicating to help address the concerns that they have. So I guess the question to you really is, when you think back, have you ever had a situation where you've held back opinions yourself for a various number of reasons, particularly in the office? And if you can show hands, just kind of let me know what you feel yourself, if you've had that experience of holding back how you truly felt about something. Yeah, a number of hands are going up. And it's interesting to have this discussion as well in terms of how you actually feel about that as well. Typically what we found when speaking to our clients is that they tend to feel that when they have the ability to share how they feel, that they feel like a weight is lifted off their shoulders. Now, I once interviewed a gentleman, it was last year around September time, and we sat for an hour. Typically our anonymous interviews last about an hour. And there were things that this individual couldn't say to their manager and couldn't say to HR. But as he sat and we spoke for about 55 minutes, I think the interview lasted, as he stood to get his jacket, he stood and said, I feel like a weight is lifted off my shoulder. Now, that sense of depression or being unable or being suffocated, really it begins to impact an employee's performance in the office. And what we want to do with HR departments and organizations is really help them uncap that anxiety within their employees to allow them to really achieve their peak performance and ultimately have the organization thrive as well. So a true story, I guess a case study really. Before I launched Human Capital Consultancy last year in February, I used to work for a technology organization as a head of sales. And we were flown over to New York to conduct some business meetings around strategy. And there was a lot of tension in the room. What happened was one of the ladies put her hand up and made a comment that she disagreed with the strategic direction of the business, primarily based on the fact that she speaks to her customers and clients on a daily basis. And the strategic direction the business was heading in was not what the clients and customers were asking for. The response to that from an executive was, if you can't get on board with what we're trying to do, we're going to have to make changes. Now, that's all well and good to some degree, but ultimately what happened in the room was more important. The room fell silent, and that was a 5-day trip, and that was I think it was a Tuesday morning actually. And for the rest of the 3.5 days, no one said anything. And so the business can't perform, and they need to actually understand how they can perform better. The employees feel suffocated that they can't share their views without the reprisal repercussions. But also, the negative effect of that is that it then leads to attrition as well, where a company feels that an individual feels that they cannot add value to the company, so they end up looking elsewhere where they can add value and be appreciated. So that fear of reprisal leads to a very vicious circle. And ultimately, what's interesting is when an individual keeps quiet and doesn't say anything, that silence actually is almost an approval of something that you actually disagree with. And so it becomes very perpetual in terms of leading to depression and depressed states. And that ultimately results in disengagement as well within the office and within the workplace. So a very interesting cycle, how holding back on the employee's opinion and employee voice can lead to anxiety, depression, and withdrawal within the business. So what we've understood from our clients that we've worked with is it's very important to really capture the genuine feedback of employees. Now, sometimes to some HR individuals or to some senior management individuals, there's a concern around what may come up as a result of open discussions, the need to actually face some challenges that employees are having. And so there is sometimes a sense where an employer may bury their head in the sand to avoid the ownership of challenges. However, the way to move the business forward is to actually get employees to contribute and to open up and to actually share how they really feel. And that allows the business to achieve its peak performance. So to drive that cost of turnover down, the winning HR teams are really driving discovery of the true causes of disengagement. And they're turning unknowns into known knowns. And through the communication, they can then create a plan to address the questions that have been honestly answered. So anonymous feedback is a great way to actually capture that feedback from an employee and give them the tools to actually share how they really feel and help to really remove that sense of low confidence by increasing the serotonin levels in the individual's brain, because they feel valued and they feel like they can actually share how they really feel. And what happens is beautiful next. When an individual shares their opinion and sees actual activity as a result of that opinion, their confidence grows. That confidence leads to a rise in the serotonin levels in the brain, which leads to more happy hormones, more perpetual and peak performance and improvement, because there's an increased sense of engagement. So interestingly, when a lot of organizations that we work with today talk about their surveys, one of the bits of advice that we give is, whilst surveys have been performed to kind of capture some level of quantitative data, it's best to not always assume the answers to the questions that have been interpreted, it's best to not assume how the answers should be interpreted, but to actually ask questions instead. Many firms are now using third parties to actually capture that qualitative data, and that ultimately leads to improved participation on future surveys because employees feel that they are actually being listened to. Now I've seen a question come in, so we'll tend to that question shortly. So in summary, to really build employee trust, employers are trying to build, or need to build a culture that supports the employee voice. That means sometimes hearing things that you don't want to hear, but at least the employees are able to share those concerns and allows them to actually become engaged. There's a lesson around understanding that employees won't often share openly to their manager or to their employee or to HR. And surveys are also unable to capture all the information that they actually really do feel. And I hope with that short clip in the video, you're able to see that there are a lot of conversations that happen where someone can share how they feel with context. So providing your organization and your employees with the tools to really share how they feel and really help drive engagement and help employees achieve that peak performance. Now, as an organization, we're putting a number of seminars and webinars, and I kind of want to make you aware of, before we go to questions, we have an evening with women in HR's positions of authority coming up on the 26th of September. So we're going to do one for gentlemen as well, but this one's currently planned. We also have another webinar where we'll be showcasing some of the real interviews in detail on the 2nd of October to really show you the importance of words and what employees really say behind closed doors. At this stage, I think I did that in about 20 minutes or so, so we're good for time. We're going to move forward to questions, please. And if you have any questions for myself or Zoe, I'm going to turn your camera on now so we can see you. Let me just get to this screen here first. And I should be able to do it this way. Panelists. And I'm going to show camera. Let's see.
Yeah.
There you are.
Hey there.
Hi, very good. So we've got one question coming. Okay, so more the comment here is, I'm not sure if you can see the comments on screen. Can you see the comments on screen?
I can, yes.
Okay, good. So I'm not sure if everyone can see the question, but I'll read it out. It says, I think that heading SAN at a very senior level has been my previous experience. Facing challenges and giving honest feedback, even when this means acknowledging negatives, certainly makes for a more trusting environment. Heading SAN exacerbates the issue. HR often have challenge or removing heads from the sand. And it's a great comment. Any questions at all for Zoe at this point in terms of the impact on the human behavior, or perhaps the trauma, or what disengagement, how that can lead to addiction? Any questions from anyone?
I mean, I think some of the stuff you talked about, Jason, in terms of, employees getting their voices heard and the positive effects of on the behavior within a community is really, really important, because you talked about the serotonin levels, and that's all about kind of positive relationships. So someone being able to represent what they think and feel about a group, about a situation, about an institution, and something's going to be done about it. Because I think a lot of the difficulty comes in when someone has the courage to say what they think and give feedback, and they're sort of pretended to listen to. So the feedback is taken, but nothing is done.
Right.
So that kind of like action over words situation. And I suppose from the people that I've worked with, my experience is that it's what response comes from feedback from employees that has an effect on self-esteem, rather than there is mileage in being able to say and feel heard and hear yourself say something.
Yes.
But also a direct effect between actually something changing.
Right.
Response to it. And we've just had another question in. So as someone who has experienced this personally, what is Zoe's go-to piece of advice for anyone who's struggling now with disengagement that's affecting their mental health and well-being?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I am really big on kind of making sure that you find a way to accurately represent yourself. So whether you're practicing that with someone else or with a therapist or with a colleague, where you find a way to actually say what it is that you want to be heard in the first instance. But if you've got a particularly difficult boss or a particularly difficult group of people that you're around, it might actually not feel very safe for you to say that, and then you'll find that your mental health is going to decline because you're holding on to not only the things that you think that or feel that you need listening to about, but also the feelings that come with that. And you have to remember that mental health, yes, it's about thoughts, but it's also about emotion. It's also about repressing those difficult feelings and the sort of the build-up of shame when you're not heard, and the build-up of anger when you're not heard. So a sort of go-to piece of advice would be to make sure that you've got someone who is outside of the system to talk to honestly about it, whether that's a friend or a family member, but you need someone who is objective and able to hear you out without having an opinion on the matter. I think in terms of self-care, that's the sort of go-to piece of advice. There's more that can kind of come out of that, but as the first step on the ladder, having someone that you can actually offload to and figure out what's going on inside of you, and then figure out what is appropriate and safe to take back into the work environment would be my first piece of kind of go-to, my first suggestion in that instance.
So from an anxiety perspective, what happens to an employee perhaps then where they feel they can't say how they feel?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I mean, if you don't feel you can say how you feel, you have to it's the employee's responsibility to make a choice about whether it's worth the suffering that might put them through. So if you're quite happy in a situation where you don't say how you feel and you leave at the end of the day and you're okay, then fine. But if you find that you're leaving work and you are finding that you're moving into depression or anxiety or addiction, some of the things that you talked about earlier, Jason, then you've got to question what is going on that is contributing to that. So in the first instance, it's a sort of internal question that is, what am I okay with? What am I okay with, and can I carry on doing what I'm doing? How is it affecting me? And when you're really honest about how it's affecting you, then you can make a decision as to what you want to do about it. Whether that's anonymously speak to someone about it, whether that's about going to, some work environments have sort of like mental health first aiders or people that they can speak to objectively, but more often they don't. So it is a kind of responsibility question.
Right. I think what's interesting there as well is the NHS has taken a view on this as well, which is in terms of patient time to see patients, there's a massive waiting list with a big increase in mental health awareness. But as a result, the NHS has come out and said in a recent report that they are putting a lot of pressure or expectation on the employer, to provide their staff with the necessary support and resources to actually help them with their mental health.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. The problem with that, I suppose, is that often, management styles can vary drastically. If you get really sort of compassionate and supportive management styles, which is often very effective in helping those people who have their self-esteem is less intact, let's say. And then there are lots of places, there are big companies, particularly, in the city, where management style is more sort of shame-based, which is kind of you get this right or else. Ultimately, they don't quite say it like that, but that's sort of how the message is received. So the problem with relying on the company to look after their employees' mental health is that also depends on the employee being able to say, I'm having trouble. Right. From an outside point of view, especially with depression and anxiety, you don't necessarily know when someone's suffering, particularly if they're a very high functioning individual, which lots of people are. So it does also rely on the employee's ability to speak up and say, I'm not okay. The employer then has to take that very seriously, because the danger is that they say, oh, but you're doing fine, your conversion rates are great, and this, that, and the other. I think the trouble is that sometimes when people speak up, they don't feel believed. And then
Right.
we get into sort of imposter syndrome, which sort of means that someone feels like a fraud, like maybe they're not as bad as they are.
Right.
And we've just had another one in as well.
Very good. Let's have a look at that one.
Where is this one? I have an employee who's taken approximately 2 days a week off work for exasperation. He ensures me that it's not work related. What would you say the best way to deal with this is?
It's a good question.
It's a very good question. And I don't know the context, but I think as an employer, you might want to have a think about what your boundaries are around it. So, for example, do you want proof that they are working on their mental health? You know, like if they had a physical ailment, I've just broken my wrist, so I know all about physical ailments. But if they had a physical ailment, you'd want a doctor's certificate to prove that they were off sick, kind of thing. And I think if we're going to take mental health as seriously as physical health, the same things have to apply. It's not a kind of get out free card. It's actually the same boundaries, the same rules, the same regulations need to apply around mental health. So I suppose, where did that question go? So it's not work related. All you can do in that instance is let them know that if it is work related, you are available for them to talk to you about it. Because it may not be work related, but the truth is it's obviously affecting their work life. So
Right.
I think there needs to be a conversation about whether it's family or friend related, how it is affecting their work life, and what the interaction between the two things are.
Yeah.
Because
I think at a high level as well, you know, the company has to perhaps look at it strategically as well, and so how can they provide their employees with the support structure they might need when there is a mental health issue or concern. You know, there's a lot of talk around disability in the office place, so the right toilet facilities and restroom facilities are available. Perhaps from a mental health perspective, having the right kind of, maybe a contracted psychologist or therapist or counsellor they can call in to actually help ad hoc.
I think it's an excellent idea. I'm actually working with a place that's opening up shortly, having sort of a mental health triage, so to speak. So if their employees run into trouble, they're not just kind of left hanging, or they're not kind of expected to go out and figure out what they're going to do themselves, but there is actually a sort of mental health, okay, well, you're in trouble, go and see, in this case it'll be me, but go and see our sort of on-site therapist. The same way you would if it was, you know, if you were in a sports team and you had an on-site physio. You know, people's minds are, it's slightly different, but they are almost more fragile when you come down to it. So yeah, I think having someone, I think it's a really good idea, having someone that you can refer to. In fact, there is a company, I'll have to get back to you because I can't remember the name of it, but there's this company that specialises in referrals through workplaces for people who have suffered trauma or grief or loss or are having a difficult time, and they basically kind of organise employees to have sort of 6 therapy sessions just to help them get back on their feet for their employer.
Yeah.
So it's slowly becoming a more sort of regular thing. Yeah,
I think what's interesting really is the employment space has changed, where there is now a recognition for mental health, you know, and awareness around mental health.
Yeah.
And so maybe employees who used to struggle before, not knowing exactly what they were struggling with, but felt like they were in a difficult cloud, they now can pin a name to how they feel. And ultimately employers were having to adjust their process and policies around that as well. But another 2 questions have come in. One question: how do you manage engagement and feedback in the public sector, meaning for civil servants? So I'll probably come back to that particular question after. And this next question come in is: my company's invested in mental health first aid training with MHFA England, resulting in 70 plus MHFAs spread between London, Birmingham and Dublin. What is the opinion in the wider market around this initiative?
As far as I'm aware, people really like it. I mean, the way that I know it's, the way that I'm aware of it working means that there's someone in the, and tell me if I'm wrong, there's someone in the community that has basically mental health first aid trained, and it's there to spot where there might be a problem. So if someone starts making mistakes in their work, or if someone is turning up late, or if someone is having trouble looking after themselves, it's their job to kind of say, are you okay?
Right.
There's something that we can do to help.
So encouraging employees to actually speak out as well about how they feel.
Yeah, so because often people, there is still a stigma attached to mental health, and particularly if the company you're working for is part of the issue, it's going to be very difficult to speak up when you're in that situation. So the mental health first aider, as I understand it, their job is to kind of alert people to the fact that there might be maybe an issue here. And from what I have seen, it's going down as an initiative. It's going down very, very well.
Right.
I do hope that it becomes more of a regulated way of doing things, because of course you do also have to be careful as to who you choose to train up as your mental health first aider, because they've got their own mental health and they need to be in good shape in order to be able to deal with that position.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it sounds like it's going down really well.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good question next as well. Do you think that the focus on mental health in the workplace may push people to be labelled and might lead to self-fulfilling prophecy? I certainly agree with talking about it, but I think it's a very careful issue and can turn our thinners maladaptive. Yeah.
I tend to avoid labels for exactly that reason. I think historically we've had a tendency to kind of name things, and particularly now where there's lots of stuff about mental health around, and it's almost like the worse your mental health is kind of a currency. I've got, my depression's really bad, so therefore I can't. And I think yes, the label is helpful because then you know what's wrong, but it also means if you've got the label, then it's your responsibility to learn how to deal with it. Right. And learn how to cope with it. And it can be within the workplace, there can be sort of bits and pieces. You can still have boundaries, you can still have responsibilities for that person. Yeah. But like you would make an adjustment if someone had broken their right wrist. If someone comes in and says my anxiety is very, very high, if an employer knows exactly what to do with that, then that's the boundary. So I think yes, it can backfire in that people may start using it as a kind of
a tool, right?
Kind of go into sort of a victim-y type place.
Yeah.
Then it is manipulative. So we do have to be careful with labels. But the thing that I always say to people is that everyone has mental health. This isn't about mental illness. This is about mental health. We all have physical health and we all have mental health. And staying on top of our mental health is really important. That doesn't mean that you have to label it as depression, anxiety, addiction, trauma. It just means that actually you're struggling a little bit with what's going on in your head. And that happens to everyone at some point. It's just that there's now movement that means that we are talking about it more openly. And I think like with any movement, it will kind of, it will move into a really big, what am I trying to say? It will be talked about too much before it becomes normal, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So where there's been so much stigma and it's been shut down and no one's talked about it and it's been an embarrassing thing, it's been something that people go through in private. Now, not everyone, but lots of people are doing it very publicly. And eventually I hope that it will become something that is just normal. So we walk into work and we say, how are you feeling? I've got a bit of a cold. And we walk into work and we say, I'm a bit anxious today. And it's not a thing. It's just, okay, do you need a tissue? Is there anything I can do? Rather than it being a kind of...
so employers becoming a bit more sympathetic or at least learned on how to react to the mental health challenge that the employees have.
Yeah, I would love there to be a sort of, we talk about mental health first aid, I would love people to get training, and this is a big thing and it won't happen in the immediate future, but I would love for people to know exactly how to modify around common mental health issues the same way that they modify around common physical issues.
Right.
So someone says, this is my anxiety, this is how it manifests, or this is my depression, this is how it manifests, I'm having trouble, I'm drinking too much, that there is literally a sort of protocol around how that works. It's slightly, that might be slightly ambitious because everyone's mental health is unique, but there are also some very common symptoms that I think if people know how it's going to be dealt with, they're almost more likely to come forward and talk about it.
Yeah.
The complication is that if they feel that the workplace has contributed to the trouble that they're having, they might feel frightened about talking about it because they might get into this kind of, one of your interviews said about the blame culture.
Yeah.
Sometimes it kind of gets into a little bit of that. But I think, like with everything, it kind of takes practice.
Right.
It takes practice, and it's happening. It is happening.
Yeah. Well, Zoe, to those who are still here, any further questions for Zoe or myself, please post them now. We're going to hard stop at 45 past, so 11:45. But some really good questions that come in today. So I think that's the end of the questions. So to those who joined, thank you again for joining. Hopefully I'll see you in the next webinar, which will be, I think, in October the 2nd. We'll talk a bit more about what employees really say and how they really feel, and what, kind of go behind the curtain and lift the hood around disengagement. Zoe, thank you very much for answering these questions. It's been great to have you online today. So thank you very much.
Thanks for joining, guys.
Thank you. All the best, everyone. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye.